All right, well, good morning, everybody. How are you? It's Wednesday. Welcome to our demo for February. We're going to be working with roses today. So I'm going to give folks a little bit of time to kind of get in here. I know I've got a lot of folks that said that they wanted to be here today. So if you're new to the group, I've added a couple of new people to the group just this morning. So if you're just getting in here, hopefully you're able to see the live and can kind of work your way around the group just a little bit. But welcome to everybody who's here. The group is growing, and I'm so excited about that. We are trying to, I really want to create a place here where everybody can kind of share ideas and share your work and ask questions and just get more familiar with watercolor. Enjoy your watercolor process more than you do already. And so for the first Wednesday of each month, I am doing a free demo here in this group. And but I paint with my membership. I have a watercolor membership that's a paid subscription, and I paint with those folks on a weekly basis. So we're painting every week, in a different group. But I'm so glad that you are here. And so if you're enjoying the once a month thing, let me know. Let me hear from you. I want to see the work that you're doing. You can post here in the group whatever it is that you're doing. And of course, if you're interested in painting with me, on a weekly basis, then definitely message me. Check out my website for more information on that. So I'd love to have you for that. Got some more folks coming in. Let me get over here to my comments. I forgot to get that on there. Good morning. See some folks here. T is here. Karen, good morning. Sherry is here. Good morning. Ralph, good morning. Lynn, Jill, several different folks are here. Awesome. All right, so come on in, take a seat. I hope you've got your things ready so that we can kind of start working on something today. So what I've got in mind for us today is to start working on roses. I'm actually going to be doing something with roses all month with February. I thought it's Valentine's Day, this month. And so I thought that'll be a fun subject to work on as we're kind of waiting for spring to get here. And I'm going to be launching back into landscapes next month. But I thought roses might be kind of fun. Roses are probably one of the most painted flowers out there, but they also are very challenging in a lot of ways. If you've tried painting roses before, you start to find that there are these difficult little challenges that you encounter with roses because of their shape and the real subtle differences in values that you see with the flower. And also just, the petals, they definitely have a unique shape. Every time you paint a rose, it looks a little bit different. It's not like a sunflower where you've just got this big round disc in the middle with, all the petals just sort of radiating out, just sort of this standard fixed shape. Roses are a little bit tricky because they're just a little bit different every time you sit down to work with them. So I want to just kind of talk about roses today and give you some tips that I think are going to help you understand how to simplify the process of working with roses and how to even start to look at them and how to visualize them maybe a little bit differently than you have been, so that it's just easier and a little bit more fun for you to approach the subject. So let me come through here and see if I've got any more folks coming in. Yes, got some more folks coming in. Awesome. Good morning to all of you. I see there's a new person here, Joan. And Joan, you may have joined me before, but you might not have commented before. But good morning. So glad you're here. All right. So one of the first things I'm going to talk about is sort of the anatomy of roses. I'm going to do just a little sketch demo kind of a thing, just to kind of talk about roses and how they're how they're shaped and how we need to, as artists, think about the shape of the rose. And because if our objective is to paint a nice, soft, atmospheric, sort of abstract, stylized, representational type of rose, we want to steer clear of heavy realism in that case. And so we want to simplify. Okay. Simplification is so important. If you're wanting to paint loose, you've really got to adopt this notion of simplification. Realism forces us to record every detail in a very exacting way, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that approach. But if you are wanting to paint a little bit more loosely, then simplification is going to be key, and you want to actually let go of some of the details so that you're focusing in much more closely on your value shifts and your colors rather than all the details within the form itself. Okay. All right. So I'm going to switch over to the work area and just show you a couple of things, and then we're going to jump into the demo. Okay. All right. So let me get this up here. And so let's just kind of look at our photo that I had shared with everybody. So I had, this is the photo that I shared, and everybody should be able to have downloaded this and definitely work with this. And I'm not going to paint the whole thing today. I kind of zoomed in on a section is what I'm going to do, and I encourage you to do that anytime you're working with something, especially when you're just trying to grasp a concept or just practice. Zoom in on just, maybe just zoom in on one flower or one section or whatever the case may be. And I'm actually going to be working with sort of this little section of this photo when we actually start to work on our demo. I'll kind of go over here. This is the little screenshot that I saved. So make sure you do that. Save your original photo, but then zoom in and capture little bits that you might want to use as practice. There's another one that I did. That one's kind of nice too. I kind of chose this one because I liked the dark background. We're talking about the anatomy of a rose, and just that it is kind of this hybrid of a spiral and also concentric circles. And so if we can think about it that way when we're painting it, it kind of takes a little bit of the pressure off. And if we can kind of think about those types of shapes and then pay attention to our values when we're painting, it does make things a little bit easier. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example over here on the work area. I'm just going to kind of do some little doodles that kind of show you, sort of the shape of the rose, the anatomy of the rose, and hopefully it'll help you to just simplify it when you're working on this on your own. Okay, all right, so we were looking at this photo of the roses earlier, and just talking about the fact that, the shape of the rose, we have these, the petals are arranged kind of in these concentric circles, but they also kind of look like spirals at the same time. So if you think about a rose, just in terms of, being sort of like concentric circles, they just kind of, the petals are just arranged and they kind of start in the center and they work their way out, in sort of this concentric circle pattern. But there's also this notion, there's, this, sort of idea that, the petals are also kind of spiraling a little bit. If I were to connect these lines, it would sort of make a little spiral, but it's all, the rose is kind of a hybrid of these two shapes. And so if we can kind of bear that in mind as we're working with it, and knowing that, when we're looking straight down into a rose, we're seeing sort of this hybrid of a concentric spiral, and with the petals being sort of broken up into shapes. If I were to, sort of continue, if I could connect these lines, they would totally make a spiral, all the way around. It would just kind of keep going, making a spiral. So it's just a spiral basically with little breaks in between. Okay. So if we can kind of keep that in mind as we're working, it kind of helps us to, to just not over focus on the shapes too much, and just remember to try to keep that pattern going. So when I start working on these roses, I want to be mindful of that sort of that concentric spiral kind of pattern that's happening inside each of these. But most importantly, I want to really capture all the darker values, all these little dark sections of color that are happening inside the roses are really the part that's going to make the rose stand out. Okay, that's really what's going to start to give it some form. Let me show you a painting that I had done a few days ago. Here's a little rose painting, and this one was just really soft, atmospheric. We're going to do something similar today, but you can see that I have not gone and created just tremendous amounts of detail here, but I have tried to stay consistent with that sort of spiraling form, inside each of these shapes, because I know that that's really kind of the way that the petals are arranged. And I have been very careful to focus on all these dark values and where they show up. Those dark values contrasting with the really light values are what really start to give me the notion that that rose petal form is happening without going in and creating lots of extraneous detail. Okay. All right, so let's kind of start working on this little sketch right here. So for this one, I'm not going to start drawing these roses at all. I'm just going to use dark values later in my paint to kind of create, the illusion of the form. But what I do want to do is just very lightly sort of sketch out the basic kind of shape of these three roses together. They sort of form this light colored cluster, of a form sort of in the middle of the composition with some dark value on, around the edges. So I'm just going to start by very loosely just kind of coming in here and sort of mapping out just the basic sort of outline of my roses here. It's almost like a silhouette of these roses right here. And you can see there they are. There's the three roses. I've just sort of created a basic kind of outline. It might not be exactly, in fact, I know it's not exactly the shape that's in the photograph, but I do have my three roses here, if you can imagine them just being sort of silhouetted. And what that does for me is it just kind of creates just a shape of where I want the roses to take place. I built this composition very much the same way and just sort of had an outline for the three roses, but I'm just going to create all of my details, all of my values. I'm just going to be doing that just with my pigment when I start actually painting, because I want this to stay nice and loose and all that good stuff. All right. So, and as we're going, I will look and make sure I don't have questions or anything like that. So, all right. So I'm just starting with some clear water and coming into my painting here, and I'm just kind of getting water all over the entire page. I do have that light pencil line there. I'm just going to paint over the entire thing. And I'll tell you something that you might want to consider when you're working with roses. We are working with a rose that is pretty light in color. And darker roses are a little bit more challenging to paint just because all the values are really dark and there's not a lot of difference between the light, medium, and dark values. They're all so close together, and that just makes it a little bit, that's an extra layer of difficulty that we're adding, to the whole challenge. So starting out, practicing with lighter colored roses, I think is a little bit easier to work with because you've got really dark values and really light values. Makes it a little easier to work with. So for this pink, I'm actually going to use some of my hot pink. This is my Opera Rose. So I'm going to get some of that out here on my palette. My Opera Rose might be a little bit dirty. I'm going to get some of my hot pink out here. And I'm adding a good bit of water to it. I want it to be kind of thin here. And so got the hot pink, and then I'm also going to add a little bit of my Quin Sienna. Not a lot, just a little touch, because I definitely want this to stay pink, but it's almost sort of a portrait pink color, or maybe alizarin crimson, if you're familiar with that color. It kind of takes it down to that soft blush pink sort of tone. All right, so I've got a nice little puddle right here, and this is all wet, and I know that when I'm looking at my photo, the centers of all of these roses do have some darker value, and the outermost parts of their petals are much lighter. So I'm just going where, kind of in the center of the roses where I'm seeing darker value, and just kind of throwing that pink in there in the center where it's a little bit darker. And you can see we're not addressing any details of any kind at all right now, just nothing. We're just establishing some shape and some color. Haven't gotten into anything else beyond that. Very loose. Okay, the only thing that we've got as far as shape is just that sort of that little outline that we created. And that just kind of gives us a little bit of a boundary to work with. While everything is still wet, somebody says that they lost volume. Please, somebody let me know if we're having a problem there with that. Um, so I'm going to start adding some of the background color, while this pink is just sitting here. I'm going to get back into my Quin Sienna, just get a little bit of that out on my palette. Somebody can let me know if we're still having an audio trouble or if it might have just been one person. I'm not sure. All right, so Quin Sienna. And then I'm going to add a little bit of cobalt blue to my Quin Sienna, just sort of making sort of that grayish tone that I'm seeing, that warm gray tone that I'm seeing in the background. And I'm going to start adding a little bit of that out here to my background just a little bit. I'm kind of keeping a distance from my flowers just a little bit. I don't want to get right next to them because that brown is that gray brown is kind of dark and I don't want it to overtake and get too far into my petals. And then I want to actually introduce a little bit of green. And so I'm getting into my green gold. And the green gold is really vivid, okay? And I don't want it to be quite that bright, so I'm gonna sweep a little bit of that tan, that brown that I just made into my green gold, just to sort of mute it, just kind of tone it down a little bit. And I'm gonna lay that in here. There is a leaf up here. And if you kind of notice, some of the petals on the roses have got almost this green tinge to them, just a little bit. It's very soft. But I'm just coming in here. This is just a brush that there's just a damp brush, and I'm just sort of swiping over and just doing a little bit of blending. And that's all I'm going to do for my base kind of layer. And you can see not a detail in sight, just laying down some tone and value and color. That's all I want to work on right now. No details. All right, so let's make sure. Okay, everybody's doing good on the sound. All right, so once I've kind of got this arrangement happening right here, I'm going to go ahead and dry this so that I can start adding some more layers. All right. All right, so you can see how soft that pink is. It's so nice. And I've been able to, because I've focused on just dropping the color in the center, I have these light edges, just like in my photo reference. You can see how the petals, there's all this pink more to the center, and then the petals are they're really light out to the edges, okay, on this particular rose. So I want to keep that really nice and light out there. All right, so now comes the fun part of kind of getting into the business of, creating these little shapes in the middle. And again, just bearing in mind, keeping these, sort of that concentric spiral, kind of keeping that pattern, that idea of that pattern in mind as you're going. And and just working that in as we go. So I'm going to start with some of my hot pink again. I want to just basically create the same colors before, but just with more intensity this time. So I'm using a smaller brush. This is my dagger brush that I can use to control the amount of pigment and also the amount of water that I'm adding to my composition. And I've also got some nice control to kind of pinpoint some of these shapes that I want to start creating. So I've got some nice hot pink out here. I want to get into my Quin Sienna and pushing that in there. And so now I've got that nice blush pink again. It's just so nice. I'm going to add a little bit more water. All right, so it's the same color as before, just a little more intensity, okay? Adding a little bit of water to it. All right, so I want to just come in. I'm going to kind of start with this flower over here to the side, and I can go right to the, right to the center of the flower. I see I've got a little dark value right here. I'm going to try to get that, and then I want to come over and grab this dark value, and I'm just looking at these dark values as just shapes all by themselves, and they are arranged in this sort of concentric spiraling kind of shape that's giving me that rose, that characteristic rose shape. So without focusing too much on detail, I want to just come in here, and I'm using this color on dry paper, sort of full strength, and I'm just kind of negative painting, around, and just painting everything that looks dark. And I am, going back and forth, looking visually at my rose, and I'm just painting the dark shapes. I'm just focusing on the dark shapes. Okay. All right, so got some dark pigment right there on dry paper. Now I want to do a little softening. I'm just using a damp brush to kind of come in and just grab some of these edges. Swish out my brush. Soften the edges. And even my brush strokes that I'm not coming in here and zigzagging back and forth. Even when I'm adding some water to this, I'm keeping in mind that spiraling sort of, that concentric spiraling kind of shape. I just want to keep that going. And look, already I've started seeing a rose. You see what's happening there? Very soft, no strenuous, harsh, exacting details, just some really soft colors in here. And as this particular rose starts to get away from the center, it does, the petals get very light on their edges. So I want to be mindful of that as I'm working. But right now I'm just focusing on everywhere that I'm seeing a really dark shape, and I just want to paint the dark shape. And, for those of you who are not used to negative painting like this, in other words, painting just the dark spots, rather than, having any outlines to kind of go by, if that's not comfortable for you and you do want to kind of add a few lines in there to help you sort of keep your place a little bit and kind of keep up with where you're going, it's fine for you to do that. But I would experiment with doing this really loose approach, because if you're already, have the tendency to paint a little tight, this will absolutely 100% force you to loosen up a little bit. Okay, it will force you to loosen up. All right, so I'm just going to keep working around my little rose here. And again, I'm still just keeping in mind this idea of, concentric spiraling shapes. Even when I'm coming in with just my water, I'm making sure to paint in sort of that shape as well, wherever I'm going with it. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next flower. Now this one, it's not quite as dark as the other one, but I can kind of see there's the center. Here's a little dark shape here. I see a little dark shape here. I'm just looking for the dark shapes. I'm not I'm not really trying to draw every single petal. I just want to look for the dark values, okay? And then once I put something in there, then I'm just coming in with a damp brush, and just so that I can kind of come in and sweep through, add a little bit of water to soften these edges, and immediately I just begin to start seeing the rose. And again, even when I'm adding my water, I'm still adding my water. The strokes for my water are still going to fall in with this really soft, concentric, spiraling kind of shapes, you know, that I want to keep happening here. All right, I'm going to move into other little rows down here. And I like to start with the center. It just kind of makes sense to me to start in the middle of the rows. I can kind of keep up with myself a little bit, you know. It is easy to kind of feel a little bit lost, and you can kind of go, whoa, where am I exactly on this rose? But if I start in the center and just keep that idea in mind that I'm trying to go for these little spiraling shapes, it really does just kind of make quick work of a rose, and you don't have to really suffer with it too much. All right, so I've got my darker value on the dry paper. Now I'm just coming back in with a little bit of the clear water, still moving around with my, you know, in that same sort of shape, even with my clear water. And again, you know, if negative painting is a little bit odd to you, if you're not used to it, you know, it's okay. I really encourage you to just kind of jump in there and just play with it and just practice with it. It really, really forces you to stay really loose with these things. All right, just adding a few more bits of color here. And notice I'm still keeping the edges of my petals, I'm keeping those light. You know, they really are light out there. And, you know, to really keep it light, you know, I'm just using water. I'm not introducing any more pigment out here in these outer edges of the petals. I'm just keeping just clear water kind of moving around out there. My little. All right, so now I want to kind of go through, and even though I've added a really dark kind of pink, there are still darker values in here. So this has really become sort of like my medium value, you know, my medium value. So you can see that like here, I've got even darker values. Here it's even darker. Right in the center, tiny little spots here and there that are really even darker than what I have here. So while this is wet, I'm going to get into my quinceanna, and just the quinceanna by itself. Okay, and while these are still wet, I'm going to come in with the quinceanna, just straight quinceanna on top of this while it's wet, and drop in some of the quinceanna to really reinforce some of these really darker values that are just a little bit deeper. I don't want to add black or brown or anything like that to deepen these values. I want to keep these values fresh and lively and all of that good stuff. So I don't want to come in here with blacks and browns and dull it too much. I want to just keep it nice and fresh. So just making my way around. There are going to be some places where I probably do mix up sort of a brown to come in, but for the most part, I want to try to keep these darker values a little bit on the soft side, or not the soft side, I guess a better word would be vivid. I want them to stand out nicely and not be dull. I want them to have a nice glow. I want the flower to kind of have a chance to glow and show off a little bit. right, so there's sort of this greenish tint that I'm seeing in a few places on my petals. You can kind of see it a little bit here. Let's see, there's a few other places, a little bit of greenish tint happening on some of these petals. I think I want to try to incorporate that, but at the same time, I want to be really careful because I don't want to all of a sudden have a green rose. I just want to have sort of that yellowish green tinge, sort of happening. I'm going to get into my green gold that I had earlier, but I'm really thinning it down with lots and lots of water. Very transparent. Just kind of dropping it in just a little bit. Very, very soft, very subtle. I don't want to overdo that at all. Very soft. You can see it's almost like a real pale yellowish green sort of color. Very soft. All right, so I'm just going to kind of let that sit for just a second. I'm going to start working on my background a little bit. I want to start really getting into those dark contrasts that I'm seeing in the background. So I'm using some of my serpentine green. This is a Daniel Smith color. If you don't have serpentine, I'm just kind of throwing it in here with the rest of the green that was already on my palette. Serpentine, a close, kind of a close substitute would be some ultramarine blue and a little bit of cad yellow, tiny little bit of blue, okay, mostly cad yellow with a little bit of ultramarine blue. And I'm going to throw a little bit of my Quin Sienna into this mix. I want this green to be almost like an olive green. Oops, I don't need that much. I'm going to throw a little bit of my Quin Gold in there too. I love having that Quin Gold in there. I'm even going to throw a little bit of my green gold in there so you can see it's a little bit more on the olive side. So I'm going to come into my painting and I'm coming back up here in the top where I see that green leaf and I'm just painting it in, and I'm leaving a little bit of space around my flowers, around my roses. There might be some places where it touches and pulls a little bit of green into those petals, and I think I'm kind of okay with that. I don't want to do it too much or in too many places. I still want to keep my petal green, but I'm staying around that whole little shape up here, and I'm just letting this leaf kind of take off and fill up this corner here. Notice I've kept that green. I'm kind of being a little selective or subjective, I guess, with my colors on this. I didn't want that green to be too bright. I'm going to get a little bit of cobalt blue and kind of throw in there with my green. Just to kind of mix it up a little bit. I got some more green kind of happening over here on this side. And so what this is doing now is when I start to kind of come into my painting and work my way into the background and paint carefully around my outside shape, that starts to give me that really nice contrast between, what's going on in the background and the soft color of the roses. Really nice soft color. This is a little bit more of my cobalt blue. I'm choosing cobalt in this instance instead of ultramarine because the cobalt is a little bit more vivid, and I just kind of want to keep a sort of a bright tone to some of these colors, even though they're dark. And you can start to see, how loose this is. I'm letting just, that pigment is just kind of running into my petal just a little bit. But, my petal is wet, and so obviously if I make contact with it with an outside color, it's going to want to connect and join and run off into that petal. But I'm going to keep some of the pigment away from the petal because I don't want all of it to go in there. But if a little bit kind of sneaks in there, that kind of gives me that nice lost edge effect. That's really nice. I'm going to get into my Quin Sienna just a little bit more and some cobalt blue, getting a little bit darker now. This is really a dark brownish green kind of tone. I'm going to add even more cobalt just because I want it to have a little bit cooler tone, but I want it to be dark. All right, down here at the bottom, got this really nice, beautiful dark tone that's happening right up under my little flower here. And I know there's a fold of fabric along the bottom, and I'm not going to try really hard to protect that necessarily. There's not enough of it there for me to be able to paint it as a roll of fabric and it read very well. So I'm just going to focus on that area just strictly in terms of value. So I'm going to let this be dark under here just so that I've got some really nice contrast against my flowers. But then I'm going to lighten up on this value as I get to the bottom here. And see, I'm just negative painting right around that petal, keeping that edge nice and soft, you know, but still with lots of nice contrast there. I'm going to, let's see, what do I want to do? I want to play a little bit. I think I'm going to risk getting a little bit of purple involved here. I'm going to put some purple. This is my Winsor Violet. I'm just kind of throwing that into some of this pink from before. And I'm going to kind of come in here in a couple of places and just drop in some of these areas that I want a little bit darker. Kind of drop some purple in. I love purples and greens together. The purples really kind of help deepen a green without muting it too much. And then let's see, I want to start adding a little bit more contrast, just a little bit. See, right up here at the top, this little flower or this petal really needs to should be able to show off a little bit, and so that I can see some contrast between the petals. So I'm looking for places to create contrast here. So some nice dark contrast against the top here, but I'm going to soften it and let it get a little bit lighter as it moves away from the flower a little bit. I'm even going to throw just some pink in there, almost like there may be another rose kind of back there that we don't quite see it fully, but it's somehow back there a little bit. All right, so I'm just going to kind of work through my rose just a little bit to see if maybe there's other little places where maybe I need a little bit of contrast or whatever I might want to do just to keep this nice and soft. And some of that purple mixture from earlier, kind of adding that in there. All right, so I've got a lot of wet going on and some nice colors that I'm, adding to the background. But I want to dry what I have here so that I can refine just a little bit. But everything's a little bit too wet. So let me look and make sure before I dry this that I don't have. Someone says this is a beautiful teaching. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you're enjoying that. Joan says. Great instruction on how to be loose and use values to guide us. Absolutely, values are so key. They tell the story of form every single time. And if we will listen to value has so much to say about form. That's why black and white photos work so well. Not a color in sight, but they tell us the story of form just because of value. All right, so I'm going to dry what I have here. to do a little bit more play here. And if you've been with me long enough, you know that when I'm drawing, that's sort of my thinking time, and I'm kind of evaluating and looking at what I've been doing and thinking about it a little bit more. And I want to add a little bit of wax in here. So this is just my paraffin wax. If you haven't seen this before, it's this stuff right here, Gulf Wax. You just get it at the grocery store and cut little chunks off of it. And I'm just going to use this to create a little bit of resist. I really like this leaf, the idea of this leaf being up here in this area. So I'm kind of covering this area with wax, covering that area that's my leaf to create a little texture. There are some little, I don't know, I'm going to pretend like there's some little structures in there, leaves or stems or something going on in there. As artists, we get to, if the leaf is not there and we want one, we can just put one. That's one of the things that's so great about it, and also great for, painting loosely. We give ourselves permission to just make it what we need it to be in many cases. I'm just adding a few little textures in here so that when I come back in here with some darker values, I've got some interesting little shapes. I'm getting back in my cobalt blue, coming up with some darker green values out here. I still want to get right back into this little section right here. There's some really nice little shapes happening in here. And when I come back in with a darker value, I can really just set off that really dark value in here. And I really start having a lot of contrast. Just using a little bit of water to kind of move that pigment around just a little bit. And I've got places where I'm having resist from the wax, and which is exactly what I wanted, because it really just communicates this visual texture and lets me know that there's deeper places, different layers are happening, deep down in between all these shapes. So now I'm just looking for really dark values that need to be addressed in my painting here. Just want to kind of finish out with some darker values. A little bit more blue. I'm going to come back in here into this flower, or this petal. Excuse me, no, the leaf up here. So I'm adding some more dark value up here, but where I put that wax earlier, it's protecting that lighter green, and I'm able to just really come up with some nice visual texture shapes up here that just really give me something interesting going on in the background without adding details. Okay, there's a big difference between detail and texture. Okay, in these instances, I really just want a lot of visual texture. Look at all that wax resist. It's giving me such nice shapes in there. And those are things that I didn't even really have to paint. They just almost painted themselves, really. All right, so some more dark leaf shapes happening down in here. Adding some more darker color, more dark value in the background here. But with my little waxy shapes in there, it just adds a little bit more drama, just a little bit more going on in there. Makes it fun. Still want to do a little purple. Just really want to throw some of that in there. Oh yeah, those little dark purple, spots are just really give me some nice contrast. All right, so I'm just kind of grabbing colors off my palette. All these colors that I've used, I'm just kind of using them over and over, here and there in different places. Picking up some of this purple to just kind of just want to look back through my little rows, getting some of this purplish color. Just kind of looking back through my rows to make sure there's not maybe a few little dark spots that I could enhance a little bit more. And this is just some of the purple. You know, I'm throwing that in right on top here. A little bit of that purple. And if I want to soften any of that, just a damp brush, just kind of whisk that around. Again, keeping the same concentric, you know, shapes going around. The purple. I'm just going to kind of work these little places in quickly. I want to move kind of quickly through the composition. You know, if you kind of go a little bit too slow, it's easy to overwork because you're thinking about it too much. It's kind of best to just kind of throw the color in there and trust your process. I'm going to get a little bit more of my Quin Sienna, just dropping that in a few places. Nice and soft. Just coming in now with just some clear water to just kind of soften edges and move a little bit of that color around. Again, you notice I'm still going in a circular sort of pattern here. If I see other little shapes, I can see there's like some green shadows in here in some of these places. Grab those. If you see that, if you're seeing that color, then absolutely go for it. I'm reinforcing these little spiraling shapes. And what's great about any of these techniques is, you know, once you're using these, you can go into, you know, experimenting with color. You know, I could have, you know, do all these roses. They could have all been just like blue and turquoise roses or, you know, something like that. You know, the main thing is the values. And anytime you want to experiment with a little bit of subjective color, it's always super fun to just take your photo, whatever it is that you're working with, and then convert it to black and white, and then you're able to see your values, and then you can just assign whatever color you want. All right. Okay, I think that's what I'm going to do there. Let me do a couple little. No, there's a couple little dark spots that I need to get. It's a little bit dark right in here. A couple more dark spots. Really want those deep little folds to really stand out. And you can see the colors that I'm using. I'm using browns, or not browns, but the sienna and purple and some different things like that, just keeping it really, really soft. All right, let me dry what I have here. Let's take a look. Tape off here. Very fun. Okay, and very loose. You notice that we did not spend any time, really carefully rendering the roses, in a, like a really accurate botanical, rendering, that type of thing. But we're still getting the feel and the energy and just sort of that soft movement, and those soft textures. It's really the soft textures and the movement and that idea of the pattern of all these values kind of swirling together. That's really what we're after, to sort of create this feeling, this sort of this a little bit more of an emotive type image that's more characteristic of the rose than maybe just very, very carefully rendering the rose. So really, really fun to do. Let me get back over to the other camera here so I can talk to you for a second. Let me look. I'm just going to see if you have questions. I'm going to answer any questions that you might have. So this was super fun to do. And look how soft the roses are, and they're not super accurately rendered. And like I have said many times, there is absolutely nothing wrong with, very carefully, accurately rendering exactly what you see. Very, very realistic. I have worked that way quite a bit, especially early in my career. I trained with a much more academic approach, and you would draw for like 2 years before you were ever allowed to paint. So you really, really had to be very careful with the way that with the way that you would draw things, so that you were being very accurate, very observant. And it's still important to be able to observe and be accurate in your observation, because that is still what allows you to take the things that you're seeing and and then interpret them. You have to kind of know what you are working with to be able to suggest or interpret your own version of what you are seeing. So if you enjoy working realistically, definitely continue doing that. There's so much value there. And but if you're feeling a tendency to want to loosen up a little bit, um, definitely experiment with that. Use those powers of observation that you've been really building on, and think more about where the values could take you, where the colors can take you, outside and beyond just the very technical rendering of the shapes that you're looking at. So you can really incorporate both of these things together, and I like to do that. Let's see, somebody says, oh yeah, somebody said that they missed the start, and it's okay. There is the replay. The replay for all the first Wednesday of the month videos that I do here. They stay here in the group for a little while. Then I usually take them down, but I put them up on my YouTube channel. Okay, so if you miss one here, you usually can come back into the group and see it for a few days, but then I do eventually take it down. But they're going to be on my YouTube channel, so I encourage you to go over there and definitely check out my YouTube channel. And if you go to YouTube, just type in Jill Williams Watercolor and you'll find it. And subscribe, because I post stuff over there too. But all of these lessons will be over there on YouTube as well, and there'll be some other things there for you to look at. So let me know if you have any questions. If you can't think of a question now, but want to ask it later, definitely post it here in the group. Tag me so that I know that you're asking a question, and I'll definitely get back to you. And if you want to paint with me every week, definitely check out my my membership information. I'll post a link for that here at the bottom of the video so that you can see it. So thanks everybody so much for tuning in, and thank you for your wonderful patience with my technical snafu earlier. We got through it, and I think it turned out great. So please share with me your work. I want to see what you've done. I want everybody to get to see what you've done. So encourage one another, all that good stuff. All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you enjoyed it, and I'm so glad that you were here. Thanks so much, guys. I'll look for your questions and your photos here in the group later, and I will talk to you very soon. Thanks, and bye.